Morning date. Welcome to another edition of Morning Date, when we get to meet with amazing figures from all walks of life. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to an incredibly smart and charming figure, Professor Anton Hur님. Welcome to the... Oh, sorry.
I was just reading off the...
Oh, okay.
명칭, 호칭 정리는 지금 해주세요. 어떻게 부르실 건지요?
네.
네.
Would you like me to call you? Anton. Okay, I'll just call you Anton. Okay. Morning date. Welcome to another edition of Morning Date, when we get to meet with amazing figures from all walks of life. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to an incredibly talented and charming figure. It's none other than Professor Anton Hur님. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's very nice to meet you finally. You are a renowned interpreter, translator, and recently you've come out with the translation of the book Vidin. What's the English title for that?
The English title is The Court Dancer.
Indeed.
Yes.
And I think our listeners are familiar because not too long ago we mentioned the book during our weekly book segment.
Yes,
So-
I think Barry did. Right?
Yes, indeed. Did you tune into the show that day?
I listened to a little bit of it, yes.
Ah, wonderful. Before we get to that though, let's give out a quiz question to our listeners. Now this quiz is pretty much related to you. It's a person who changes written or spoken content from one language to another. What is this person known as? Is it number 1, a translator, or number 2, a transformer, or number 3, a transmission? One more time. A person who changes written or spoken content from one language to another is known as blank. Is it number 1, translator, number 2, transformer, or number 3, transmission? 퀴즈 정답 맞추신 분들은 추첨을 통해서 모닝스페셜에서 준비한 특별한 선물 보내드리도록 하겠습니다. Well, Anton, as I said, it's a great privilege to meet you. Please say hello to our listeners.
Hello, listeners of Morning Date. I'm very happy to be here. I've been watching and listening to EBS since I was a child, so I'm so thrilled. Every summer vacation, I would get like the EBS language like tapes and like learn Mandarin off of the radio. And that's, yeah, that's my clearest memory of EBS, which I completely love.
Mm-hmm.
I am a translator living here in Seoul. I was born in Sweden and I grew up in Hong Kong, Ethiopia, Thailand. I went to high school in Thailand, and but I went to college and graduate school here. I spent my entire adult life here in Korea. I served in the military here, so I'm also thoroughly Korean. And I'm currently teaching at Ewha University and the Korean Literature Translation Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yes, that's my life so far.
That's a wonderful life indeed. 이대 통번역대학원에서 지금 교수님으로 재직 중이시고요. LTI Korea라는 인스티튜트에서도 역시 가르치고 계십니다. 근데 지금 자라오신 환경 얘기를 하면서 배경 처음에는 스웨덴에서 태어나시고 그 다음에는 어디서 사셨다고 하셨죠?
네, 스웨덴에서 태어나고 홍콩, 에티오피아, 미국에서 좀 살았고요. 그리고 태국. 네.
Wow. Was that because of your parents' job? Or?
Yes, my
Okay.
father. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, do you have any memories of living in these different countries?
Yes, I have. Most of my memories are kind of like sense memories, I guess. For example, Ethiopia has like really great food.
Right.
It has a wonderful climate, and the people are just really wonderful and hospitable. Thailand, of course, is very similar in that way. Thailand, for me, I think because I went at such an impressionable age when I was like a late teenager,
Right.
that yeah, it remains as sort of the country that defines my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love Thailand a lot. And of course, Hong Kong is just, I mean, it's so overwhelming when you go to Hong Kong today.
Mm-hmm.
But even back then, you can imagine what it's like for a 5-year-old.
Right. So, which of those places do you see as home, if any of those
Okay.
places are
Well,
can be
actually,
considered home?
I actually consider Gwacheon here in
Gwacheon
Korea.
is my home, yeah.
Because I spent 10 years of my childhood in Gwacheon and 9 years overseas. So I actually spent more time of my childhood here in Korea than I did overseas.
All right, very interesting. How about in terms of languages? What was the first language that you learnt, as far as you can remember?
The first language that I deliberately learned was English, but I spoke Korean before then.
Because of your parents, obviously.
Right. And so with language, I really feel like, and we kept going back and forth between overseas and Korea. So I would go to Korean schools and then international schools and Korean schools and international schools. So it sort of built, it could work two ways. I guess like some people turn out like you, for example, like fabulously fluent in both.
Oh,
but
no.
for some people, they turn into alinguals.
Yes, I know.
Have you noticed?
There's
And,
a lot of debate over that as
yes,
well.
Yes, there is.
You're completely bilingual. Do you think there's a technique that you use to keep that up?
Oh, this is a really good idea that my parents had. My dad, he loves the English language more than I do. It lifted him from poverty, basically. And so he speaks to me and my older brother. I have an older brother in English. And my mother speaks to us in Korean. And my parents made my brother and I speak in English to each other all the time. So when we speak Korean to each other, like, no, speak English to each other because you're going to lose your English otherwise. So that was like a method that they had to keep our English.
그럼 지금도 가족이 다 모이면은
네,
이렇게
형하고는 영어로 얘기를 해요.
어머니랑은 우리말로 하시고
예.
아버지랑은 또 영어로 하시고.
영어하고, 네.
그렇게 그냥 가족 안에서도
네.
한 가족인데
네.
다른 언어를 계속 쓰는 게
네.
이런 이중 언어 구사를 하는데 좀 도움이 되는군요.
예, 저희 부모님 전략이었고요. 지금 생각해보면 정말 똑똑한 훌륭한 전략이었던 것 같아요.
네.
그 당시에는 그냥 왜 이렇게 자꾸 바꿔야지 좀 괜찮은데 근데.
저는 뭐 비슷하기도 하고 좀 다르기도 했지만 저는 영국에서 자랐을 때 집에 있으면 무조건 우리말을 써야 됐었어요. 왜냐면은 집에 있는 시간보다 밖에 있는 시간이 더 많았고 제가 살았던 지역이 영국이 사실은 뭐 80년대, 90년대에 한인이 많지 않았거든요.
그렇죠.
문 밖에만 나가면 영어를 쓰기 때문에 문 안에 들어오면 무조건 우리말을 쓰도록 하셨었는데 it's a bit different to your method, but I think it also helped
Right.
to
That's
make
really
me
the method
bilingual.
too. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious to know if you studied interpretation or literature to become who you are today.
I actually didn't study literature in college. I went to a very good high school in Thailand where they had a really good literature program. So by the time I graduated, I felt a bit ambivalent about studying literature. I did want to eventually, but I thought, maybe I can try other things. So I studied law instead. Big mistake.
Wow.
Very big
학부
mistake.
때 그러면은 법을 공부하신 건가요?
네.
그럼 석사는?
석사는 my graduate 석사는 제가 문학을 전공했어요. 영문을 전공했어요.
네. 그러고 나서 이제 자연스럽게 번역의 기회가 주어진 거예요?
아니요, 그 전에도 번역가였고요.
Okay.
그 한국문학번역원, Korea Literary Translation Institute of Korea. 그래서 그 문학 번역가 양성 과정이 있어요.
네.
그래서 거기를 1년 다녔고요. 지금 2년 과정으로 바뀌었고. 그래서 그렇게 해서 문학 번역을 좀 배운 다음에 제가 졸업을 하자마자 한국문학번역원 지원을 받았었어요. So that's how I sort of became a literary translator. But it's not very difficult to get into in terms of as long as you're very savvy when getting the rights from the publisher or the author, and then you just translate it and then you find a market for it. It's like a lot of legwork, but yeah, there's no real formal academic process in becoming a literary translator.
Okay. Now I've read that you emphasize translation must come first before interpretation. I'm not sure what this means.
Okay.
Could you explain?
Before all the interpreters in the audience at me, what I meant by that was, in that video by Matthew in New York City, in that video I discuss just the name of the graduate school that I happen to teach at, which is Ewha University Graduate School of Translation and Interpretation. Other schools have their names, Graduate School of Interpretation and Translation.
Right.
So I just wanted to emphasize that, in our school, translation comes before interpretation. They're both very venerable and venerated professions,
Mm-hmm.
but they both do require very different skills. And as someone who's done both and who does both, I just personally prefer translation because it's sort of, I don't want to say it requires more brain work, but like when you make a mistake in translation, everyone can see it. When you
Yes.
make a mistake in interpreting, people are like, oh, I'm just gonna smooth over that. For a bit."
Right, unless it's recorded, it's just
Right.
gone the moment you say it.
Yes.
Exactly. How do you deal with untranslatable words or concepts that don't exist in one language or the other?
As a literary translator, I can't believe that anything is untranslatable.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a luxury. A lot of people who don't really understand how literary translation works, for example, if you look at a lot of the criticism surrounding Deborah Smith's The Vegetarian, which I think is an excellent translation, is that people get all very nitpicky about, like, oh, this word wasn't translated into this word. And, you know, we don't do word for word, like, that's not how literary translation works. We are trying to convey a voice, a mood, the weight of the text. We are not trying to recreate a text in another language. I know that like everyone thinks that's what we do, but that's really not what we do. So as long as I got the voice across or the mood across,
Right.
or even created like a new voice or new mood out of that, like what I believe Deborah Smith did very, very well, then I consider, and most literary translators consider, that their job's done.
Right. For me, just as a reader, I find that the best translations are those that you can't tell have been translated. Right?
Yeah,
It just seems like an original.
Right. There's a lot of controversy about that.
Okay.
It's called foreignization, where you incorporate just foreign elements into the target text. And some people say that, oh, if you make it sound like it was written in English, this is a form of language imperialism. And I don't agree with that stance. But I respect people who think that way. And I guess you can think that way, but it's not particularly an approach that I agree with, because at the end of the day, I have to eat. And these translations need to be read and understood and appreciated by people who don't have Korean as one of their languages.
All right. Well, in just a short while, we'll talk about the book that you very recently published as a translation, which is the very famous Rijin by Shin Kyung-suk, and we'll get to that after a song break. The song we're going to listen to is You and Me by Gustav Spetz. We're back with Morning Date, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Professor Anton Hur, the very accomplished translator of the book The Court Dancer by Shin Kyung-suk. This isn't the only book you've translated, obviously.
It's the only book that's been published so far, but
of course, you've translated many things. You teach translation, and
Yes.
But this one is probably the more well-known and obviously a very famous book here in Korea. So tell us how this came about. How did you get to translate this?
the story of how a translator gets to translate a book is always very fraught. It's a very fraught story. I have to thank my mentor, Sora Kim Russell, who is also a teacher at Ihwa and who taught me literary translation. She translated Shin Kyung-suk's previous book in English, I'll Be Right There, and she knew that I was a huge Shin Kyung-suk fan.
Yeah.
So she connected me to the agent, and I essentially auditioned for the agent.
Right.
Right, and so when I got it, I remember basically got the audition. The agent sent me the text message. I was standing on a platform at Cheonak Station, and I like screamed, "I got Ijin!" And I started crying.
와우, 영화 한 장면 같아요. 전철역에서 이 신경숙 작가의 리진 번역을 맡게 되셨습니다. 이 소식을 듣자마자 굉장히 기쁘셨을 텐데. 그러면 이쯤에서 우리가 번역과 관련된 퀴즈 한 번 더 읽어드릴까요? 저희 청취자분들을 위해서 한번 읽어주시겠어요?
A person who changes written or spoken content from one language to another is known as a 1. Translator, 2. Transformer, 3. Transmission.
Okay, and let's read that out one more time for our listeners.
A person who changes written or spoken content from one language to another is known as a 1. Translator, 2. Transformer, 3. Transmission.
네, 퀴즈 정답 맞히신 분들은 추첨을 통해서 모닝스페셜에서 준비한 특별한 선물 보내드리도록 하겠습니다. Well, what was the most difficult thing about translating this book? Or conversely, what was the easiest or most rewarding thing about it?
This book was very easy to translate, thanks to 신경숙 herself, because she's some writers you lean on more than others when you translate. Like some writers you have to sort of move things around a bit because not because they're bad writers, but because some things just don't work in English.
Right.
Whereas with 신경숙, her writing is like every word has a reason to be there, and sometimes I would be translating and I would change something because I think, oh, it might sound better this way. And then a few lines down, I would realize, oh, this is why she wrote it that way. A few lines back, so I changed it back to the way she wrote it. That happened so many times in the beginning, and then I stopped trying to change things, and I just like listened to what she was doing and did exactly what she was doing. So it was actually not a very difficult. It was not a very difficult translation. The only difficult thing was the fact that it was I had to rush it a tiny bit because publishing realities, but otherwise it was a very smooth translation.
네, 아무래도 번역에 있어서 제가 생각할 때 굉장히 어려운 부분은 지금 말씀하신 것처럼 데드라인을 맞춰야 되는 그런 부분이 아닌가 싶은데 혹시 번역을 하실 때 어떤 나만의 번역 방법 아니면 뭐라 그럴까요? 방법이라기보다는 is there a process that you use or go through when you translate? Do you like shut out the whole world when you translate? Do you go to a special place? How do you do this?
I don't really do anything special. I know some translators have really helpful software installed on their computer so that it blocks out the internet for blocks of time.
Yeah.
I really should install that myself. But I don't really do that. What I guess the only really special thing I do is that I don't like the flow of translation to be interrupted. So what I do is if there's something that I need to look up, like a verb or a noun, and this was a historical novel, so there are a lot of those.
Yeah.
I would just leave it in Korean and then go back to it in a later draft and worry about that later and concentrate on getting the voice down.
I think that's a really good tip for anyone who's translating out there. Just to keep the flow going and not be interrupted.
Right.
Because I thought when you said you don't like to be interrupted, you turned off your phone or something, but it's more about your own process of just going with the flow and keeping up a speed, I suppose, of translating.
Yes, you sort of have to enter a trance sort of state of flow, I guess is the correct term for it.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once that is, it's really, once you have that, it's easier to just keep doing it.
Right.
And voice is all about creating a sense of flow. So I think what's paramount is that you sort of get yourself in the zone, so to speak.
Right. In the zone. 바로 그러한 뭐라고 할까요? 번역 전문가신 분. In the zone. 그런 모드, 그런 분위기 속에 이제 완전히 몰입해 있어야 할 것 같아요. It's not easy. Obviously, a lot of people want to be good translators, but not everyone can do so, I guess. And sometimes we will find things that just make us cringe a little bit here and there. Now, as a professional translator, do you ever come across something that makes you go, oh my goodness, and you just wish that people would stop using these bad translations? For example, I see things on the internet where people take pictures of menus and it will say 육회 6 times, when it's supposed to be like raw beef or something, right? Is there anything that makes you cringe?
Like beef tartar, yeah, that's kind of, the thing is when you become, like when you are a translator, you sort of become actually more sympathetic to other people's translations, I feel. Like you don't become more judgmental. It's more like, oh yeah, this is not something that I would do, but I might do it this way. I mean, beef tartar is not a good example of that, but
Right.
but like for example, other people's literary translations.
Yeah.
Like, I don't quite agree with the way this was. Like I wouldn't do it this way, but I respect the way you did this. I'm 신경숙's 4th translator. She
Okay.
has 4 books out, and they all
Right.
have different translators. So
Okay.
we all sort of, if you read through all of them, you all sort of see how people sort of solve different problems in different ways.
Right.
And whereas Konglish is an interesting, it's a very complicated like post-colonial question of like if you criticize it, then you're an imperialist, but at the same time like it could be aesthetically really ugly. And at the same time, like there's a lot of Konglish that's really pretty. I can't think of any at the top of my head because I'm so imperialist myself. But so it's it's a little difficult to criticize unless it's something like yuke. I think that's
I mean that's
something
just straight out bad. But sometimes I guess Konglish in its own way it has become a language
Right.
of its kind. I guess there's Singlish, there's all sorts of other types of English around the world. Singlish being Singaporean English, obviously, and I think also I agree with you. Sometimes Konglish is okay. Sometimes. All right.